I like the moniker that it's the Def Jam comedy of Canada. I mean, how influential was Def Jam comedy and how different was it from, or is it from Def Jam's comedy? Maybe say in the early days.
Because I'd done a show with my friend Ronnie and another act out of Buffalo. We did a show with a hip hop act, 4 hip hop acts before us. And it was the first time I had a predominantly black audience in the city. So I know this seems ridiculous to believe that, Def Jam had already been on TV stateside 5 years at that point, right? So it let me know there was a market for it. I talked about racial profiling and some of the other things that were going on in town. I got applause breaks and laughter. And then when we started this, our black community up here is predominantly of West Indian background. So you get all these young comics that are doing Jamaican patois and talking about being from Barbados and Trinidadian talking like high voice. And so you got them throwing that island flavor into it. And these are voices that up until then had never been heard by anybody in our shows.
Yes, that is Canadian comedian Kenny Robinson. And you've tuned into another episode of Comedy History 101, where we school you in comedy. I am Harmon. Hello. And Kenny is our guest today and also the subject of the new documentary, People of Comedy, celebrating 30 years of the Nubian Show. Yes, 30 years ago, Kenny created a comedy scene in Canada that didn't exist before, which was a regular comedy show featuring people of color and is considered by some the Def Jam comedy of Canada. And we're going to do a deep dive into the documentary, the Canadian comedy scene, and what it was like in Canada back in the day before the Nubian Show existed. But before we jump into the episode, a few quick plugs. On June 18th, 7 p.m. at Fred's Doghouse, I wrote a play. It's called The Roast of Graham Parsons, which is a collaboration with some musicians from Skinny Dennis, if you happen to know that venue here in Brooklyn. And on June 19th, 7 p.m. at Young Ethel's, I'll be presenting that 80s Improv Challenge. Yes, 3 improv teams compete by creating scenes based on obscure videos from the 1980s. And it's a very special pro wrestling edition. Yes, all the teams will be creating scenes based on pro wrestling videos from the 1980s. And on June 26th, 7 p.m. at the Players Theater in the Village, I'll be presenting AI versus Human Roast Battle. Come out and see a human rapper take on a machine learning AI in a comedy roast battle of tomorrow. Yes, rapper Human BS will be taking on this month AI Jesus in a comedy roast battle. And finally, on June 27th, 7 p.m. at the Red Room in the Lower East Side, I'll be presenting Tale, NYC's finest storytelling. No hokey gimmicks, no dumb themes. Tale brings you the best in New York storytelling. And you can find out all about my show dates on my site, harmonleon.com, or on the social medias at harmonleon. Also, take some time to like, subscribe, and comment on Comedy History 101, wherever you get your podcast, or on our site, Comedy History 101, or on the social medias at Comedy His 101. Every star, comment, subscription keeps us going and shows your love for such great episodes as this. And now, without further ado...
You're stupid. Everybody's so stupid.
I'm trying to use the phone!
Excuse
Comedy History 101.
This show is a big deal. 30th anniversary.
It would just be inauthentic to go on that stage and try to be somebody you're not.
You know what the difference between Chinese and Filipino tour races is? The difference between a Honda Civic and a tinted Honda Civic.
This is one question I'll get from an old lady. Where are you from? I'm just like, I'm from Wakanda.
It's a show that allows a space for an eclectic group of people, and that's like the most black thing you'll ever get in your life.
Yeah, eh? First of all, congratulations. 30 years of the Nubian Show.
Oh, thank
the
you.
Documentary, loved it. Watched it last night.
No, it was great. 30 years went by quickly. You know, I wasn't even 40 when it started. So to think now I'm in my sunset years, let's say. So it's been a lifetime in itself.
Or you're primed like a fine wine.
I've always drank hard liquor. 12 years is the maximum.
Well, then like a fine scotch.
Yeah, I'll take that. I'll take that.
I'm in Brooklyn, New York. For those of us stateside that might not know the Nubian Show, could you just explain what the show is?
Okay, when I started it, there were maybe like 7 or 8 black comics working throughout the entire country of Canada. Okay?
Like as far when you say the entire country of Canada,
From Halifax,
I mean the entire
to
country of
Vancouver.
Canada.
From East Coast to West Coast. There were maybe 7 or 8 of us. And we were mostly predominantly in Toronto. So, you know, I saw there were these young kids that were coming up and they were trying to, you know, crack into the mainstream system. And I kept, you know, being told, oh, you see this one guy, he sets your race back 20 years. And I said, really? I thought when I got drunk, I sat the race back 20 years. So then I saw him and
wait, back up a second there. What happens when you get drunk?
oh, I set the race back 20 years.
Oh, okay.
I don't drink anymore. That's
Oh, all right. Okay. That explains it. All right. Enough said.
But I watched his act. And no, he wasn't setting the race back 20 years. The kid didn't know how to write a tagline. So, you know, and his setups needed a bit of work. You know, there was all these young comics trying to get their foot in the door. And I was considered one of the premier comics in the country. So I was the right guy to hold the door open.
And what was let's go back before you started the show. What was the scene like? Did it feel like an inclusive scene or was it like difficult, like going on the road, or just tell us
It's like playing hockey.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't hear things, and other times you hear things, you know? So you like I ever said, if we ever had, and there weren't a lot of black people in the audience. I used to say, if you ever see more than 4 blacks in the audience, they're probably Ronnie Edwards' family. He's one of the comics that, and he comped them. So from that, we built up not only a great talent pool, but, you know, we've had sold out audiences for 30 years now.
Yeah. And so then what did you do? So you pitched comedy Canadian impresario Mark Breslin.
Well,
the
somebody
idea
else had
or-
brought up to him that maybe they should be judged by a jury of their peers if they were funny. And he said, are you saying a black audience, a black show? And they said, yeah, but I already decided I was going to do that because I'd done a show with my friend Ronnie and another act out of Buffalo. We did a show with a hip hop act, 4 hip hop acts before us. And it was the first time I had a predominantly black audience in the city. So I know this seems ridiculous to believe that, you know, I mean, Def Jam had already been on TV stateside 5 years at that point, right? So it let me know there was a market for it. You know, I talked about racial profiling and some of the other things that were going on in town. I got applause breaks and laughter. And then when we started this, our black community up here is predominantly of West Indian background. So you get all these young comics that are doing Jamaican patois and talking about being from Barbados and Trinidadian talking like high voice. And, you know, so you got them throwing that island flavor into it. And these are voices that up until then had never been heard by anybody in our shows.
So tell me about that. I like the moniker that it's the Def Jam comedy of Canada. I mean, how influential was Def Jam comedy and how different was it from, or is it from Def Jam's comedy? Maybe say in the early days.
Well, I mean, it was influential. Def Jam was influential because I was back down in Chicago staying with my mom for a couple of months and I watched it. And it was the first time I was headlining clubs in Chicago, but never did I ever come across in my path, my travels, Bernie Mac, who was a Chicago comic. Well, Bernie was playing the black clubs on the west side, south side, and I was playing the mainstream clubs on the north side or the suburbs. So our paths never crossed. And so I was influenced by that, and with the DJ and the whole hip hop kind of influence. And there were all these great comics. I mean, the cream of the crop was on the first Def Jam 2 or 3 years. I mean, that's when you had D.L. Hewley and you had Martin Lawrence as your host, and you had all these other great Eddie Griffin, and you had all these other great incredible acts. Tracy Morgan was a guy that you could have seen but not thought much of compared to somebody else, or you may have just loved what Tracy Morgan was doing. Me, I laughed like I laughed like I had a lobotomy performed on me at a young age. I listened to Tracy, I just, because he's so silly. A lot of my comedy is very hard edge or dark or political, and then Tracy just gets me laughing like you shit yourself.
Was it kind of like one of those things, if you build it, they will come? So you created like the Sunday night show, and there was like you said, under 10 comedians in Canada of color.
So
and then suddenly you created like this sort of, inspiration for more and more from the community.
I've had comics move from Alberta so they could do the Nubian show as well as working the other shows. Alberta is like, say, they moved from Montana to New York.
I've been to Alberta.
Yeah, okay, so I don't have to explain it. Yeah. So and then they get from Alberta and they go, there's a lot of us here, So culturally, it was something else. I mean, like we had like some of the best filmmakers in Canada, and directors and music producers were coming to the shows. And then we started getting the LA crowd, because they were doing a lot of films in Canada at the time. So we would get people in the audience like Tommy Davidson, who was doing Booty Call up here. And then Will Smith came with Vivica. Nobody got smacked that night. And then, Robert Townsend was doing a couple of movies up here. So he used to come and hang in the back, and he picked a few comics out of the lineup that he's seen to put in a couple of his films and what have you. So it was all very...
Yeah, here's something just out of the blue. Half Baked was filmed in Toronto.
Yes, that's why we were able to get Dave Chappelle twice on the show. And we had Chappelle twice, and let's see, one time Jamie Foxx came looking for a comic, Mike Bonner, out of Detroit, but Bonner had just left to go party after the show ended, so he missed having him. And Chris Rock popped in, didn't do a spot because he was filming. It's had 2 different names. No, I can't remember. But it was a remake of Heaven Can Wait. I can't remember the because they had 2 titles and they changed it. But so yeah, we had a lot of Kevin Hart. He was known as Little Kev. I booked an act from Philly, and they asked if they could bring an opener with him. I said, well, sure. So they brought Kevin in, and then we used them as a headliner, and he brought Big J with him. And both of them cried when they drove back to Philadelphia because I paid them in Canadian, and they found out what the exchange on the Canadian dollar was 30 years ago.
And, 30 years now.
They went, man, that's a long way to go from $19 US.
Yeah. And then, so if you're comedians, let's say you're from Calgary and you're doing the circuit, how freeing did they find it, like playing the Nubian show compared to saying playing,
the regular
Alberta
clubs?
Yeah. Like as far as like material or audience reaction.
Well, I mean, first of all, if you've been around the comedy clubs, you know that Black audiences tend to be a bit more hyped and electric than Caucasian audiences. So you had that thing. And then we had the whole hip hop. We have a DJ always. So there's always the energy in the room that starts before the show even starts, and they play you on and they play you off. So some of the comics would change their material, or some of them, once they got in front of an audience that they didn't feel foreign in front of, a lot of them were doing stuff they couldn't talk about in front of a white crowd.
Like what would be like an example? Like,
well, besides everyday racism, things about how your West Indian grandmother would curse you, or black churches, or getting your hair done, or the foods. Bun and cheese is a Jamaican snack that anytime a comic would reference bun and cheese, the audience would fall out. That not being my background, I did not quite understand it, but I knew that if I dropped bun and cheese somewhere during the show, I would get a laugh. Cow buddy is another reference, or cow cod soup. One friend of mine, Mark Trinidad, says, Jamaicans are the most homophobic people, yet they eat cow grok for years. Because cow buddy or cow cod soup is a cow penis soup. So, just say they're homophobic, but they eat cow pecker soup. That would have the audience losing their minds. So, there were cultural differences as well to go along with the material.
Yeah, that's what I found different. Like, say, if you had to compare the Def Jam, it was, more people talking about the immigrant experience, like coming to Canada, coming
Yes.
from Jamaica, coming from Trinidad, So, again, just like sharing those experiences.
Well, exactly. I mean, that's the immigration policies of the 50s and 60s, and these are the I guess early 70s. These are the children of immigrants. That's why Russell Peters was so successful and big with us. He was on it from our first show.
I was the only Indian kid in the boxing gym. I was in there every day working on my left jab, my right jab, my punjab. I was nice with it, though.
And, all of his best friends in high school were Jamaican. He made it big because, there was the, first generation child of an immigrant doing material, talking about his father, talking about the culture. There's a whole lot of people that finally felt they were being spoken to.
At what stage of Russell Peters' career did he come into the show? Was he just starting out
for a couple of years? Cutting his teeth, in all the one-nighters. And of course, he's playing all the mainstream comedy clubs in the country as well. So he had more stage time underneath him. But it was the Nubian Show that he was able to get his first chance to score a Canadian TV special. And because the producer of Comics and Comedy Now, Joe Baudelaire, he came down to the shows and, he started scouting talent there. So a lot of the comics that were with us that first couple of years were finally able to break through that wall and get TV exposure, half-hour show, hour show, what have you.
And then how long did it take for the show to get its legs? Like, was it sold out from the start?
We turned away 150, 200 people the first night. We had comped a lot of people because I was out in Alberta doing a tour, and I had some of the comics like, are you guys giving away tickets? Yeah, I gave away about 30 yesterday, and I was just worried about trying to pack the club. It was the club owners. I went, how many tickets are comps? So they were having a bit of a stroke. We turned away so many people. Let's keep this going.
And did you start taking it to the other festivals like Just for Laughs or Vancouver?
They all knew we were around, but they did what they were going to do.
Okay.
Or they didn't do what.
But there's a lot of undersaid in that statement.
Well,
do you find it like, so it's interesting.
We can still be friends at this point, so I won't say anything more.
Which I guess like just in broader terms, is it like that? Like hard, like Canadian comedy politics is very kind of stringent? It's still not as inclusive, or
everything in the business is exclusive and buddy system. Doesn't matter if it's LA or if you're playing Cleveland, Ohio. I remember going, trying to book in Ohio, and I was told if you work for this club, you can't work for that club. And I said, well, that's great because neither club's booked me. So, so no bridges burnt there. How dare you let them turn you down first? I wanted to tell you we didn't want you. Doesn't matter where you go in this business, there's politics.
And what's your comedy history? Like growing up, you grew up in Toronto? What were you listening
I grew up
to?
Bouncing back and forth between Winnipeg and Chicago. So Winnipeg's a high alcohol abuse, high crime risk kind of town. And
I just interviewed Kevin McDonald from Kids in the Hole. He lives in Winnipeg currently.
Yes, but he wouldn't have run in the same circles as me.
Yeah.
So, Winnipeggers will tell you that, we've got the most murder per capita in the country. And I go, well, per capita, that's such a Canadian thing. They call, or the part I grew up in, it was called Transcona. So people tell me they call Transcona Little Chicago. I go, well, that's funny because when I lived in Chicago, nobody ever called us Big Transcona. So, I grew up predominantly in Chicago. And then I guess from grade 10 till I was about, 40. No, I guess I was about 19 or 20. Winnipeg was my home. I went to university there, and that's where I first decided I was going to do stand-up. And then I left Winnipeg because there's no stand-up happening. So I went down to Chicago and I took acting classes.
The joke goes, there's comedy, but there's no stand-up happening.
Yeah, there's all kinds of comedy. Watching somebody fall down a flight of stairs carrying beer and they don't break a beer bottle. That's pretty funny, especially when you kick the person down the stairs. My love for it started in Winnipeg, and it got more refined in Chicago. Then I came to Toronto. I was an extra on the Blues Brothers, and I talked to Dan Aykroyd for a minute, and I told him I was Canadian. I was thinking of moving to Vegas, but I might go to Toronto, and he looked at me like I was an idiot. And he said, well, if you're more established, you go to Vegas, but Toronto might be good for you. And there's Second City and what have you. But I wasn't interested that much in improv or sketch because you had to work in a group.
But going farther back, like when you were a kid, who was really shaping your comedy?
Oh, well, from the time I was told to leave the kitchen when grown-ups were drinking, Dick Gregory was always quoted. From who I liked watching, it was Jonathan Winters was a favorite, and then Jackie Gleason was a favorite. Then as I got older, Fryer became the man. When I first heard of that album, That Nigger's Crazy, I was having a lot of racial run-ins with one percenters that were the frequent the bars I would go to. And so every time he said, ends do this and ends do that, and ends never get burnt up in buildings. And instead of it being a hateful, hurtful word, I found it healing and endearing. And it became a term of endearment. It reminded me of my dad's friends that wore the hair however James Brown was wearing their hair at the time. And, the see-through socks and the red pants and, people that stamped their feet when they laughed. And then I thought about the kids I went to school in grade 6 and 7 and 8 with. And, if one kid didn't have a coat, so he stole someone else's coat from another school on a field trip to give his friend. So I thought about those people, and all of a sudden it wasn't such a terrible, hurtful thing. So it was a combination of things.
How did you hook up with the director? First of all, it was really well done, the documentary. And I don't think I've really seen this sort of structure before, where it's kind of that cross section between stand-up special and documentary, which was kind of a really cool structure to it.
Well, Anton
maybe
Leal
the closest
was
is
the
like
producer.
Seinfeld, that documentary did in the 2000s, but that was even less like stand-up,
Yeah. I mean, the director is incredible. Counterfeit Productions, they've been doing a lot of television in Canada, and they were taping the Just for Laughs specials for years. And they're the ones that approached me, and they found the director. And the director, he came to the show, and he being a person of color, he got it.
How many kids do you have? None. So obviously you weren't dating a Jamaican fella.
It was really like our Def Jam of Canadian comedy.
Now the Jamaicans are getting loud. Rip, rip, rip.
For 30 years, I considered the hottest night of comedy in the country.
Nothing like making a white woman pregnant to make you celebrate your national pride. That's great.
And at first I wasn't so sure about the idea of shooting the stand-up in black and white and the B-rolls in color. I wasn't so sure about that. But I said, well, these guys know what they're doing. You know what you're doing, and they know what they're doing. So let them do what they do. And I think we'll probably get nominated for some Canadian Film Awards. And, I think we might have missed some of the film festival deadlines, but I think we'll probably find some near the end of the year we can squeeze into. And I think we'll get some well-earned kudos for that.
And I heard you mention like part of the I guess formula in the show is open audience booing of comedians. Could you maybe elaborate on that and maybe the best and worst performances you've seen in your 30 years?
Well, I've been doing comedy
with that in mind,
like
35 years. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've had the booings are great, but we haven't had any decent booings in maybe 4 or 5 years. The audience has changed. Well, the audience changed 3 or 4 times over the period of time. Well, the best booing was the gentleman that was in the show in the film, Gary Tate. One time they booed him before he even got to the stage. I introduced him, and they saw him take the first step, and somebody yelled, "Oh no, not this motherfucker again!" And then the booing started before he even got to the mic. So there were people there was comics that got booed and had to drive back to Buffalo, and they just went straight out the back door, and I paid them by the back door, and in the car they went. Would-be comics that cried, and they gathered, and all the comics went to console them outside in the alley. There was one woman that was heckled and booed, and they yelled, "Your elbows are ashy." And she looked, and indeed, they were ashy. And she came back killed. And she's
that's such a strange heckle.
And she's got cocoa butter before every show. She's greasing up before she goes on.
Yeah, I'm never going to get that heckle again.
No. But she also came back as a better comic. There's been times when comics would get booed, and and the other comics go, "Are you going to get them? Are you going to go take them off?" I go, "Nah, let it build. Let it build." A couple of times I've thrown the white towel onto the stage like a fighter when he's getting his brains knocked out. So there's been great shows. There's the first time Tommy Davidson did this show, the audience stood up for him. The standing ovation, just because he was Tommy Davidson, and they couldn't believe that we were blessed and graced with his presence at the show. So there's been all kinds of magical sets during those years. There's a comic out of Detroit, Bobo Lamb. He did a set where he talks about his punchline, stab, 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 and he repeats. He goes. He goes, white people always get stabbed in horror movies. Hey, don't go in the basement. Stab, stab, stab. Hey, you can't stab me. I'm Joe Kowalski. Stab. So the audience lost their mind. I could swear a week, 10 days later, you could walk in a room and you could still hear the echoes of stab. He did such a, of course it was in my head, but I asked the doorman, he says, do you hear stab, stab still? He goes, yeah. So, it was like some kind of voodoo that he put on there. There was a time when another comic, R.I.P. Big Daddy Fitz, he drove in, I had a couple comics cancel. He drove in from Baltimore. He drove tank in the Army. So he goes, I got a couple of comics with me. Can you put them on? I said, not a problem. So he pulls up in his caddy. Yeah, after driving from Baltimore in about 4 hours, which is like a 9-hour drive. And it was like a clown car, about 6,000 comics kept coming out of his car wanting to get stage time, So I go, I got 20 for you, I got 20 for you, I got 20 for you, I got 20 for you. I don't have 24, but you can come back and I'll give you 50 next time. So it was great like that. Like I said, Russell Peters, he did the Nubian Show, and that scored him his first TV special. And then that helped open the doors for everything else.
I was about to get my next beating. I stopped my dad. I go, don't do it. I'll phone Children's Aid. You ever had your parents call your bluff? You'll do what? I'll phone Children's Aid. Is that right? Oh. Ooh. Well, let me get you the phone, tough guy.
Big thing here, after you get this happening, for your regular applause and laughter is not the same. The Jamaican culture, they have what they call the gun salute, or gunshots. They go, "Bill, Bill, Bill," and they pretend they're shooting guns off in the air. Well, once you have 60, 75, 100 people doing that, it does something to your brain that regular laughter just isn't the same anymore.
A couple last questions here. What is the most you've laughed off stage or behind the scenes of the show?
No, I don't know. There's been 30 years of these moments, me putting somebody up that's been really obnoxious and watching them get booed. That's big.
Now, is it harsh booing? Is it like Evening at the Apollo booing?
Yeah, it's
Apollo
or is it
booing. Still kind of Canadian nice booing.
It's Canadians
just always boo.
It's Canadians acting like we're the 51st state for about 30 seconds. Jesus. One night, DMX came in with Anthony Anderson, and there was a ruckus at the door because one of them wanted to bring in their can of ginger ale, and the manager wasn't going to have it. And they came in, and they were just smoldering. You could see they were angry, and they went like the third row, and they all had suckers in their mouth, right? So they broke up, the show, and I looked at him, I says, "Who y'all? The Lollipop Crew?" So of course, the audience is laughing. DMX is like, "Whoa." He's giving me that look, but I don't know who he is. Now, if B.B. King had walked in, "Oh, Mr. King," but so I don't know who DMX is. I'm an old guy. So then I said, "You'd be a lot more intimidating without the suckers in your mouth." And we take care of suckers right off the bat. So then he starts to laugh then, and then Anthony Anderson, he's loud talking this table full of girls. "Let me buy you girls a drink." I said, "Sit down. You ain't got no money to buy anybody a drink." I buy everybody. I got money. So he pulled out a wad this thick of American money and a wad this thick of Canadian money. I said, "Well, shit, let's cancel the show and you and me just go drink somewhere." So, that was a great night that happened on stage, but was based on what happened off the stage. There's been 30 years of great nights. A couple of times comics have smacked other comics before they went on for stealing a joke or for talking shit about them and, about to bring them on. And I look over and just see when the guy get hit. So I bring the guy on. He went, "Oh." Then I said to the guy that hit him, "Next time, could you wait till after he's been on before you give him a shot?" So my manager is sitting with me. "He just hit him." I said, "Yeah, it's been coming for a long time." So, we've had moments like that, and also there's a kinship that won't find on other nights of the week.
Yeah. And who would be, well, I call it like the Mount Rushmore of the Nubian Show, though you don't have a Mount Rushmore in Canada, but you get the metaphor.
Yeah. Well, can't go anywhere without Russell Peters. You got John Paul. Got, Jesus, so many good ones coming up. Crystal Ferrier, she's incredible. Indian woman married to a Jamaican dude. So the material there is a nice cross culture, and she can work it raw. There's Mark Trinidad. Trix is killing all across the United States. He's doing great. There's the young cat named Shay. He's moved on to doing stuff internationally. So there's been a lot of great comics that have come, and some are still with us, and others have moved on. Sterling Scott, he won $25,000 on Canada's Got Talent, got the golden ticket. Then there's young comics like Mr. Lewin and Marlon Brand that are popping up that are just doing great stuff. So there's no shortage of outstanding talent.
And what do you think has changed the most in the past 35 years of comedy in Canada or
I've
Toronto?
got more competition for shows now because everybody who ever did a show for me now is now booking their own shows. So once upon a time, we were the only show in town, and now we're just the grandpappy of them all.
I guess lastly, what would you say is the legacy of the Nubian Show and its place in comedy history?
I don't like to think about it because then I'd be a real jerk off then, but John Paul's, he loves to say that I changed the scene. And there was Andrew Clark was a writer for one of the local papers here, and he called the first Nubian Show the night top 40 comedy died. There's become more specialty shows after that. I guess a glass ceiling or a glass wall's been shattered. Now like Ron Jossel's another great comic. Him and Keith Pedro, they're Filipino comics, and from the Nubian Show they've grown, and they're working the world. They're doing shows in Asia and touring all over and bringing in the Filipino crowds and what have you. So there's been many that have grown from this.
Yeah, very cool. And where can people find the documentary and find out more about you and your shows?
Okay, well, the live show, in case you're ever in Toronto, it's on the last Sunday of the month. So, it's a good thing a lot of the holidays happen on the last Sunday of the month. Here we have July 1st is Canada Day, but I don't think we'll be getting too many Americans visiting us these days because you may not be allowed back into your own country. Did you have fun or enjoy yourself while you're across the border?
Let's see your social media.
Did you think that socialized medicine might be a good thing while you were away? It's showing on Crave TV. It's sort of like our HBO. In fact, it's in bed with our HBO. But yeah, so I don't know if you can get it or if you can Google it stateside. I'm not sure, but definitely check it out.
I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. Yeah. So Kenny, it's so great to meet you, and thanks a lot. It's great talking to you.
Thank you. Pleasure chatting with you. You take care.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
And that wraps up our episode today on the history of Def Jam Comedy of Canada with Kenny Robinson and the Nubian Show. Also, a big shout out to my friend / associate producer on this episode, Jean-Francois Brisson, who put me in touch with Kenny Robinson for today's episode. I am thankful. I am grateful. Also, footnote, check out our past episode on the history of Yuk Yuk's Comedy Club with comedian Evan Carter. Yuk Yuk's, as you recall, is the home of the Nubian Show, and we do a bigger deep dive into one of Canada's very first comedy clubs. Once again, quick plugs. June 18th, 7 p.m., The Roast of Graham Parsons at Fred's Doghouse. June 19th, 7 p.m., Young Ethel's That 80s Improv Challenge Pro Wrestling Edition. June 26th, 7 p.m. at the Players Theater, AI versus Human Roast Battle. And on June 27th, 7 p.m. at the Red Room, Tale, NYC's finest storytelling. No hokey gimmicks, no dumb themes. Tale brings you the best in New York storytelling. And you can find out all about my show dates on my site, harmonleon.com, or on the social medias at Harmon Leon. Also, remember to like, subscribe, comment on Comedy History 101, wherever you get your podcasts. Show some love, show your support, because we enjoy bringing you such great episodes, such as the one we delivered to you today on People of Comedy and the history of the Nubian Show. And now, until next time, bye-bye.
You're stupid. Everybody's so stupid. I'm trying to use the phone.
Comedy History 101.